Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Oh my goodness, we're almost done with the month of June. I cannot believe it. Time is going so quickly. My daughter and I just got back from Oklahoma, where she participated in the Pinto World Championships as an amazing equestrian, and I am so proud of her. So she drove with her trainer out from Sacramento to Oklahoma and back, and they had just incredible adventures and so much fun. So they are now home, and I'm thrilled, and I'm so glad to be here with all of you. So we're going to talk about wage hour compliance. I know that's not the favorite topic for many of you, but it's really important, and it's such a good thing for us to use our time today to talk about, because all of these lawsuits are coming out. There's so much going on with wage hour laws, you guys, and what happens is, I think, we want to be too practical. We want to be pragmatic. We assume that these laws, when they are enacted, they are intended to be fair and they're intended to make things easier. It's just not the way it works. If you remember from Schoolhouse Rocks, when we were all little and we learned how laws are made, right? Laws are introduced. Many times lobbyists are involved. Trade industries, trade associations are involved. There's all sorts of goings on behind the scenes about these laws. And then you end up with something that employers have to comply with. And it's not always easy. And wage hour is one of those areas. Because what happens is, when you mess with people's money, the money they are supposed to be making at a job, that really strikes at the heart of what people worry about, right? So they think they're going to get X amount of dollars to pay their bills and to do what they need to do. And if you don't process their pay correctly, or something isn't being done correctly, they will go to the mat for that. That is why wage hour is such a huge potential source of liability. We have a big webinar coming up next month called The $1 Million Mistake, which is all about wage hour compliance. You should check it out and join us, because we're going to talk about all the ins and outs. Today, what I want to talk to you about is just why you need to be on top of it and what these rules are about. There are some fundamental misunderstandings that I want to clarify. So first of all, understand that the vast majority of wage hour laws, rules, regulations are applicable to non-exempt employees. What do we mean by non-exempt? Employees who are not exempt from those rules, right? That's where the word or the phrase non-exempt comes from. So when you deal with non-exempt employees, who we all know must be paid for every nanosecond they work in California, right? They're entitled to all sorts of things that the exempt employees are not, like rest breaks, like meal periods, like overtime. Now, exempt employees are also covered by these laws in terms of things like, do you pay them the minimum salary you're supposed to pay them? You know, in California, for those white collar exemptions, the executive, the administrative, and the professional, you've got to pay 2 times the state's minimum wage times 2080, which is the number of hours for full-time work. So $16 an hour times 2, that is $32 an hour times 2,080. You're going to be paying about $66,000 a year in a fixed salary that is not subject to change based on the quantity or the quality of the work. So there's usually a salary test and a duties test for these exemptions. Exempt employees have to not only be paid the right salary and be doing the right duties, but they have to get a proper wage statement. Everybody, for example, has to have on their California wage statement how much Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act sick leave they have available to them. So there are a number of rules that come from a number of different places. Now, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act applies to most employees in the country, but California law is much more strict than the FLSA in most areas. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, what you're going to be dealing with are the California Labor Code, the Division of Labor Standard Enforcement's interpretation, their opinion letters, their publications. You're going to be looking at court decisions in the state. So you have to stay on top of wage hour developments. This means that somebody in your organization needs to be responsible for wage hour compliance. You don't want to be in a situation where you're scrambling to try to figure out what is going on. You also don't want to rely on, for example, a payroll company who says, oh, we're also an HR professionals and we know how to make sure that you are compliant. Okay, well, guess what? Half the time they don't know what California law is. Half the time they're focused only on federal law. That is not going to help you if you are a California operation. So you have to pick the best resources, and you have to have somebody internally who's going to be able to keep up with what's going on. All right? Now, the other thing to understand about wage hour, which is different than some other areas of employment law, is that employees cannot waive their rights generally. So if somebody's entitled to overtime, they can't waive their right by saying, that's okay, I know we're not doing well this month, don't pay me overtime. They can say that, but they can come back later and demand payment, right? Don't mess with the money. We've got to make sure that we're doing what we should be doing on that side of things. When we're talking about funding, we're talking about how people are paid, we're talking about all of those issues, right? And when I say funding, I mean funding your obligations as the employer, whether it's for a retirement plan or a healthcare plan or somebody's compensation. Bonuses, incentives, right? Commissions all have to be properly calculated, properly paid, properly displayed on the itemized wage statement. So there's a lot going on here. One of the things I want you to be aware of is it is your burden as the employer to prove that you are complying with applicable wage hour rules. So that means when you are sued, it is not the employee's burden of proof, it is your burden of proof. So you have to make sure you've got policies, practices, procedures, protocols, all of those things in place to comply with this panoply of rules that most California employers are subject to. Even public sector employers. I know many of you who listen to us work for public entities. Many of these rules apply to you as well. If the California law doesn't apply, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act certainly does. So you've got rules elsewhere, even if they're not California rules, if you're a public entity. So I want you to understand it is your burden, which means you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to have things well organized. You have to know exactly what your processes and procedures are. You have to explain to employees. For example, I had a call this morning with a client. They said, well, can we put in our travel reimbursement policy that if you don't turn in reimbursements within 30 days, we're not going to pay you? No, you can't. It's illegal in California. Should you be able to? Of course. If somebody wants to be reimbursed, shouldn't they be held to a standard where they give you the darn request within a reasonable period of time? Yes, absolutely. But it's not the way the world works. So you have to be sure that you're not doing something inadvertently that is going to cause you a legal issue down the road. All of you have heard of the Private Attorneys General Act here in California, PAGA. This is what allows employees to sue on behalf of their coworkers. It creates millions of dollars in liability for employers every year. And it's on the ballot this year in California to eliminate. So if you don't vote for anything else, if you don't know who to vote for president and you're sick of the political system, that's fine. Vote to get rid of PAGA. Because I've got to tell you guys, it is a huge albatross around the neck of employers when you can take something as small as you took a 29-minute meal period instead of a 30-minute meal period, and now you're on the hook as the employer to pay multi-million dollars in settlements, right? Or in a jury verdict. So burden is on you. You got to know what the laws are. You've got to have somebody internally. The other thing that I want you to think about when we talk about wage hour compliance is it is hard. I agree with that. There are rules you have to comply with. There are things you have to do that are not always going to make sense. It's going to take you time to stay on top of things. But the truth of the matter is, there is an incredible sense of satisfaction when you are not relying on someone else to do what needs to be done, but you know the rules as the employer. So those of you who are listening, you might be the HR person, you might be the in-house counsel, you might be the person who's running the business. Just make sure that somebody internally is able to communicate to you what's going on. The rules change, they're not static. So this whole idea of finding your resources is critical. I want to show you why wage hour is so important and why it can be such a risk for you. Think about the difference between baking and cooking. When you cook, you open up the refrigerator and you see what is in the refrigerator. And you may even follow a recipe, but you're going to likely follow it loosely, right? It says, 16 ounces of tomatoes drained. You may not drain them all the way, right? It's a little here, a little there, a little shake, a little shook, a little bit of this and that. Baking is completely different. Baking is very precise. My daughter has learned this as we've made cakes and as we've made cookies and as we've done all sorts of things. If it says 1/4 ounce of baking soda, that means you get the baking soda in that on that scale and you weigh out 1/4 ounce, or 1/4 teaspoon, you level the teaspoon. Baking is very precise. That is how wage hour is. You can't be a little bit pregnant and you can't be a little bit in compliance with overtime rules. You can't do a little shake here and a little bit there. You have to be in with both feet, and you have to be sure that you really understand what is going on. Now, I will tell you, there are a number of wage hour issues that have not yet been resolved by the courts. For example, let's say you have employees who travel around the state to different workplaces. They don't have an assigned workplace. Do you have to pay commute time for them to get from their home to the first place and from the last place to their home? If so, how much? Does it matter how far away they are from that first location? None of those questions are really appropriately answered under the law, so you have to make judgment calls. This is why you need to know what your potential risks are, what the law requires, and then you can make an informed business decision about what you're going to actually do. So for example, you guys, let's assume you have people who work in your office and they don't always take their rest breaks on time. And you're supposed to monitor that. You're supposed to police it, but you don't want to. Well, if you don't, you could have some liability. You might decide that risk is worth taking. I tell my staff, we're an employment law firm. We're going to do it right. You're going to take your rest breaks and you're going to take your meal periods, and that's all there is to it. You can make different decisions. I would never judge that. I just want you to understand there are significant risks here. And if you don't know what the law is, you can't properly evaluate those risks. Okay, so don't run from wage hour. You can do hard things, okay? We all do them every day. Figure out what wage order applies to you. Understand what rules govern your industry and go make sure you're in compliance. That is your assignment. Get it done in the next month or so. I don't mean do a big audit or do a big assessment. Yes, you can always do that. But just go figure out, what is your rule book? What rules, what guidelines, what regulations apply to you? And then you can evaluate whether you're actually doing it, whether you actually are complying. I know it's a big ask, you guys, but it's critical. Get out there, get it done. You'll be so much happier when you can say, I've looked at it, I know what the rules are, and these are the decisions I'm making. Thank you so much for joining me here today, everyone. Go out and make it a great day. I'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.